Hello, my name is Dion Smith, and I'm going to be discussing metacognition and problem solving. After this presentation, you should continue on to opening Nancy Zepeda's link, where she'll continue the discussion of problem solving, and after that, discuss some of the instructional applications and classroom strategies for us. So let's begin with metacognition. You may be asking yourself at this point, what is metacognition? Most people simply say that metacognition is thinking about thinking, and I suppose that does kind of sum it up. Of course, there are a lot of components and sub-processes issues to discuss when we tackle the topic of metacognition. Metacognition involves an awareness of thought process and learning strategy. It accesses most of your brain structures and attempts to sort of diagram it have not really done it justice. It is complicated, sometimes cyclical, and constantly updating and restructuring cognitive meta processes. Why don't we get started by looking at the brief history of research and investigation into higher order cognitive processes. Beginning in the early 1970s, learning theorists first began to really pay attention to executive functioning and self-managed learning. This is really as far back as our textbook goes, but I wouldn't be the first to argue that discussing metacognition should be at least tracked back as far as Rene Descartes and his famous quote, "I think, therefore I am." It was not so much the thinking itself, but the self-awareness and reflection that Descartes was talking about that proves our very own existence and really is a subject of metacognition. I guess really as far as the book goes, though, meta memory is the first meta process to be ever investigated in the modern era. There are several theories of meta memory, and a great deal of literature is still being produced on the subject. In fact, the topic of meta memory could probably fill an entire semester-long course in and of itself. But we'll leave meta memory alone for now and just mention that it's sort of where researchers got their first foothold and began to investigate in earnest learner self-knowledge and managing one's own cognitive process. So, if we were really to try and simplify the subject, there are basically two aspects of metacognition: knowledge and capabilities. So the first aspect is knowledge of cognitive processes itself. That is knowing the tasks, strategies, instructional plans, and goals that are involved in a metacognitive process. The second aspect that the book talks about are the capabilities that are required in metacognition. These are things like setting goals and accessing resources. You're going to need to set a goal for your own learning, and you're going to have to seek out sources of information and instruction. Another capability is forming and selecting strategies. Some of these strategies could come from your long-term memory. They might have been taught to you in the past. And sometimes we can form our own strategies on the spot and deal with new things on the fly. A third capability is self-evaluation and monitoring progress, and this is really a higher order process that's very crucial in metacognition. This is where you evaluate your own comprehension, your own success, and that leads us into the last capability and our ability to redirect our effort. This is where metacognition becomes a cyclical process. Allows us to go back to the very start and set new goals, find new or better resources of information, start thinking about different strategies, maybe asking other people what to do. This is metacognition and self-awareness. There are three key components in metacognition that are discussed in Chapter 7. These are planning, evaluation, and monitoring. Planning is a component that really just consists of setting goals, budgeting time, selecting strategies, and collecting other resources than time. Evaluation speaks more towards one's level of understanding or comprehension. This is a key component where we're able to evaluate ourselves and see whether or not we need to change things up to succeed at our learning process. The third component is monitoring. This is the step or process that allows us to check on our own learning progress and select what are called repair strategies when the ones we're using aren't working very well. And so now that we have most of the basics behind us, let's delve at least a little bit into some of the more complex aspects involved in metacognition. Okay, so obviously there are many different types of metacognitive strategies, and different people use different strategies for different reasons. Also, individuals vary between each other in terms of metacognitive skill level. So why do these people differ from each other? One factor that can contribute to differences like this is the extant knowledge that they have in a particular domain of information. In other words, an art major is going to be in familiar territory in an art history class, whereas a math student or math major is going to maybe need to struggle a little bit and come up with some new strategies if he's going to succeed in that course. A second factor that causes individual differences in metacognition is achievement goal orientation. In other words, a person that judges their self-worth on how knowledgeable they are is probably going to be better at metacognition than someone who's just worrying about how popular they are in class. A third factor that can contribute to individual differences is a person's self-efficacy beliefs. In other words, how confident you are that you will succeed in learning can determine your actual success. Low self-confidence tends to demotivate people and result in less effort in strategizing. In fact, they may just give up. But the fourth factor is perhaps one of the most important factors, and that is age. The older you are, the more knowledge you have attained. The older you are can affect how much you need to achieve things. And past experiences will sort of skew a person's confidence level either positively or negatively. Most importantly, though, with age comes a greater supply of former strategies that can be applied to present problems. The more that is stored in your long-term memory, the greater potential skill you will have at metacognition. And so expertise also results in different meta processes. Experts use their time and effort in a maximized way and are very different in how novices go about allocating their resources. Experts also can use fix-it strategies very effectively when their monitoring process tells them that they're underperforming in a certain learning strategy. Also, they're more flexible in their use of strategies. In other words, they won't get mired down and struggling forward with the same inefficient strategy if it's not really working for them. Now let's change gears a bit and focus on metacognition and studying. There are several components of studying that have implications for metacognition. Really, the first one involves getting started, and that is defining the task, knowing what is required of you. This allows us to move another step forward and start setting some goals and planning, allocating resources like time and seeking out instruction. Another component that is involved in studying is study tactics and strategies. Students will have in their repertoire, depending on their age, a number of strategies that they've already been taught or that they have formed out of necessity in the past. Part of metacognition and studying is going to be evaluating the success of those strategies as they're applied to the learning process. And then, adapting and monitoring begins in a sort of cyclical process of adjusting tasks and picking new strategies and forming new goals is undertaken to find success in learning new things. Obviously, metacognition in younger students will be different than metacognition in older students. But how so exactly? Well, younger kids will have lower awareness of their biases, emotions, and misconceptions. All these, of course, affect metacognition. These are the internal mental world of the student. Older kids will understand their own mind and competency level better than the little kids will. And of course, with age comes more secondary abilities and more tasks that one is good at. So that completes our discussion of metacognition for the moment. Now let's dive into problem solving a little bit. Every problem has at least three components. First, there are its givens, or the obvious elements of the problem. Second, it has a goal or a desired outcome or solution. And third, there are what are known as allowable operators. These are the steps or procedures that are going to take us from the givens to the goal. Initially, researchers analyzed simplistic paradigms of problem solving like the general problem solver or GPS and heuristics. Heuristics are really just kind of following rules of thumb to solve problems. Both of these approaches were far too simplistic at the outset to really have any applicability to more semantically rich applications. The third prior research field that the book talks about is artificial intelligence, and I was a little taken aback by how they discussed it from kind of a standpoint of history. I guess their point is that artificial intelligence in its infancy was a simplistic approach as well and really didn't significantly contribute to our ability to solve problems. However, artificial intelligence is an ongoing field of study, and it's very exciting. Less simplistic, but still insufficient, really, is the ACT-R theory that emerged in the 1990s. The ACT-R theory, or adaptive control of thought-rational, was a huge step forward, but really it isn't useful when you move away from linear problem solving into more intricate and challenging problems. That concludes this presentation, and you should now follow on to Nancy Zepeda's link, and she will continue the discussion of problem solving for us.